Hi everybody, I hope that you're all doing really well. So today I am back to talk about the book You Made a Fool of Death with Your Beauty by Akwaeke Emezi. Now this isn't going to be a review video as such. I am going to talk about the book and I am going to kind of talk about my thoughts of it, but this is actually going to be a video where I talk about my experience of reading this book and all of the other books that I have read that it made me think of. I think the title of this is going to be like Bookish Connections, and I don't know if I'm going to make this into a series because it really does depend on how many other books this happens to me with, where I'm reading it and thinking, oh, this thing reminds me of this book I read, and this one, and this one, and this one. You know, it might be when I'm reading a book that I think of a couple of other books whilst I'm reading it, but there were so many instances whilst I was reading this where I was making connections in my head that I thought it might just be interesting to talk about that. And that is not at all to say that this book is derivative at all, or that Akwaeke Emezi is copying these other authors. Not at all. That is not what I'm trying to say. Basically, what I want people to get from this is just a reminder of how your own personalized individual reading and reading experiences can impact on your own take of a book, what themes you end up picking up on, how receptive you are to the themes within a book. What you have read in the past very much so informs what you read in the present, and what you read in the present will inform your future reading, and so on. Some of the connections I'm going to make here are going to be tenuous at best, but it's where my brain went whilst I was reading it. It might not be where your brain goes to, and that's cool. That is completely like a personalized individual thing. But first off, just to give you a little bit of a taster about what this book is about. So through this, we are following the main character of Faye. Faye is an artist in her late 20s, but she's been spending the last 5 years very much grieving her late husband. Despite the time that has passed, and despite all of her friends and family telling her that she should move on, that she should find someone new to love, she's been very, very reluctant to, as you might understand. This book begins with Faye really trying to take those steps to move on and to find somebody else. She initially hooks up with a guy called Milan, but that doesn't really go anywhere for her. She ends up instead falling for his friend Nazia. They really seem to have a connection, they really hit it off, and over a few weeks we see how their relationship builds, and eventually Nazia ends up inviting Faye to the Caribbean, which is where his family is from, in order to meet his family and also to exhibit her work at a gallery. Faye leaps at the chance of this free vacation and hops on a plane with Nazia to meet his family, hoping that their relationship will just deepen as a result of this time away and getting to know him even more. And it's only on the plane that she discovers that Nazia's father is actually a celebrity chef, Aleem Blake. And what she does not expect is that when they get off the plane and Nazia's father is there, she is instantly attracted to this man. And basically the bulk of this plot is Faye coming to terms with the fact that she has fallen in love with her boyfriend's father, and how does she get herself out of this mess. And that is really the main word that I thought of whilst I was reading this, was, oh my goodness, this is so incredibly messy. Like, it's really very well done, and I think Akwaeke Emezi's writing style is so great and it's really engaging, and I was invested, but all I could think was, oh my god, how do you get out of this mess? It just felt like you were watching a car crash. You are totally invested and you want to know what happens, but you know it can only end badly. Whilst I am increasingly becoming more of a romance reader, I think this kind of romance where it is so incredibly messy, where it is maybe a little bit taboo, you know, a girlfriend running off with her boyfriend's father, it's the kind of thing I couldn't read a lot of. It's something I would only dip in every now and then. Last time I was on holiday with my parents back in May, I found myself just sat watching Four in a Bed, which is basically the come dine with me off the bed and breakfast world. Or you're in a travel lodge late night and the only thing that's on TV is like Naked Attraction or the Kardashians. Like, it's something that I do not indulge in very often, and I enjoy it when I am indulging in it, but I couldn't do it all the time. In terms of literary illusions, it very much made me think of things like Normal People or Conversations with Friends, especially Conversations with Friends by Sally Rooney, in terms of the messy dynamic, in terms of this relationship that you're just like, oh god, what are they going to do next? How are they going to resolve this? Like with Sally Rooney, there are so many times in this book where I was wanting to yell at the characters, what are you saying? What are you talking about? Because they are being so obtuse. So I think the thing is that Akwaeke Emezi knows that this is messy and does not try and paint this as being overly romantic. And actually, talking about these characters, I really enjoyed reading about them because they felt like real people. I could hear them, I could hear these people like existing in real life. And I think an aspect of that is that there is heavy use of slang in here. What I mean by that is Emezi's characters use slang, not for any particular artistic reason, they just use slang because that is how they talk, because people use slang. It is not a judgment on any characters. You're not meant to infer anything by somebody's use of slang. They just do because people use slang. You are especially not meant to infer anything about somebody's class or their level of intelligence by their use of slang. And especially after reading so many classics and even modern books where this is used. Like even in things like Harry Potter, there are characters who use slang and there are characters who don't. And often the characters who do use slang are kind of coded as being less intelligent or somehow of a lower class. It's very Dickensian. I of course thought about the slang chapter in Les Mis. In terms of a more modern book, it made me think very much of The Bread the Devil Knead by Lisa Allen Agostini, which is a really great book, and I'm not trying to say anything bad about it, but there is a moment where the main character, who does use a lot of slang in her language, wants to explain to the reader that despite the fact that she uses slang, she's actually very well read and educated. Like, she wants to impart that on you, to not judge her for the words that she is using, the vernacular that she is using. This book does not do that at any point. There is no point where characters are apologising for their vernacular, and I think that's a really welcome change. As I say, this book is very much dealing with grief. Not only is Faye dealing with her grief, but one of the things that she actually connects with Aline Blake, the father of her boyfriend, with, is the fact that he also has lost a spouse. And so of course I was making a lot of literary allusions to other books that deal with grief. I feel like every other book is a book that deals with grief, to be honest. But particularly books that I've read recently, for example, things like One True Loves by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This is another book that is following the early death of a spouse, and where do we go from here? In that book you've got the main character whose husband ends up disappearing and is presumed dead on their first anniversary. And then following this main character as they come to terms with that and try to find love again. That was definitely something that I could see paralleled in this book, and particularly within the character of Faye, whereas a book that I kind of paralleled to Aline Blake, a character who I thought matched very well with how he dealt with his grief, was Xavier in This One Sky Day, or Pepicho, I believe that is the American title. Both of these characters have a lost spouse, and the way that they deal with their grief is through cooking. Both of these characters are chefs, and they kind of channel their grief into their food. Xavier very, very literally, because he has like magical powers where he is able to magically flavour his food exactly right to fit the person that he is cooking for. It also very much made me think of Hamnet and how art can be a release for your grief. In the second part of Hamnet, after Hamnet has died, we see how Hamnet's father, William, is able to channel his grief into his play, taking his grief for his son Hamnet and channeling that into Hamlet. And there's so many moments in this book where I was trying very, very hard not to be judgmental of the main character of Faye, because you know how much grief is fueling her decisions. Like I say, there were so many moments where I just wanted to jump into the page, grab her and be like, what are you doing? What are you saying? And you're just like, hold off. Cool it down. You are not in the emotional turmoil that she's in. But then it also just felt like there was only one character who actually had her head screwed on, and that was Joy, her best friend, who she every now and then will have a phone conversation with, and her best friend will just be like, what are you doing? And even then, it was only in this particular situation. In all other aspects, Joy felt like a very all over the place kind of character. It was just in giving romantic advice to Faye that she seemed to have her head screwed on. And that very much made me think of another book I've read recently, which is Here is the Beehive by Sarah Crossan. And in that book, you've got the main character who is grieving. She's grieving for a man that she'd been having an affair with, despite the fact that she knew that he was married, and she's having to come to terms with her grief, despite the fact that no one can really know that she is grieving him because he was married. She can't publicly grieve him. And the only person who actually knew about this relationship was this man's best friend. And there are so many times in this book where she turns to that best friend for advice on what she should do. And he's just like, nothing. Like, leave the family to their grief. I understand that you're hurting, but you cannot do anything. And whether or not you do agree with him that this is what she should do, there are many ways in which it is kind of insensitive to her grief, but also you feel like she needs that because she feels so wrapped up in herself that she can't think clearly. This best friend character feels like the only person who is looking at things objectively. Sometimes I wanted that best friend character to actually jump into this book and also give this main character advice, because I feel like he would have some great advice to give. Another bookish connection I made whilst reading You Made a Fool of Death with Your Beauty is about therapy. There is a moment near the end of this book where there seems to be a massive shift out of nowhere. The main character is like, do you know what would fix all of my issues right now? Therapy. And yes, she is absolutely right. And for the majority of the book, I have been saying these characters need therapy. But it did feel very sudden It just kind of came from out of nowhere. I've been shouting at you to do this for the last 300 pages, but I didn't think you were actually going to do it. And this is something, as much as I love this book, it also happens in You and Me on Vacation by Emily Henry. The characters are dealing with a lot of emotions and they are doing a lot of foolish things, and then out of nowhere, the main character will have an epiphany and be like, therapy, that's the thing I should get. And I'm like, yes, good. This is a thing that you should absolutely do. But why did this come out of nowhere? But it was also nice because I'm like, yes, this is exactly what you should be doing. Talk to professionals about this. Don't just deal with it by yourself. But yeah, as soon as this came up in this book, I thought, You and Me on Vacation. That was the solution at the end of that book too. And so at the end of all of my ramblings, you might be wondering, was this book good? And I would say, yes, it definitely was a very good book. I think Akwaeke Emezi is a really great writer. I feel like they were able to tell this story in a way that I was really invested in these characters. I wanted to know what happened next. But did I enjoy this book? To be honest with you, I don't know. I don't know if I enjoyed this book. Like I say, it's a kind of messy character dynamic that I don't know if that is something that I always want to go to. It's not something I want to pick up on the regular. And the reason I think I was so unsure about this was because of another book that I finished around about this time that's also a romance book. Now, these two romance books are completely different from each other, different premises, different writing style, and that book was When a Scot Ties the Knot by Tessa. Now, like I say, this is full-on escapist fantasy romance. Well, it's not a fantasy romance, it's historical romance, but it's escapist fantasy for your brain. It is book candy for the soul. It's not true to life, it's not literary. The plot is a little bit ridiculous, but I knew from the moment that I picked it up that I was loving that book. There was no ambiguity with it. I was having so much fun that I did not care whether or not it was realistic or not. Whereas You Made a Fool of Death with Your Beauty is technically a better book. The premise is more believable. It is probably better written, but to be honest, you know I don't care about writing, and what does it even mean to be well written? Who knows? But as opposed to When a Scot Ties the Knot, where I spent most of the time being like, oh my god, I love this, I'm having so much fun, I spent most of my time reading You Made a Fool of Death with Your Beauty thinking, am I enjoying this? I'm invested. But I don't really love these characters as well written as they are. I think the writing is great. I think this is crafted well. It feels like a thing that could actually happen. But I don't know, there wasn't that spark for me. When a Scot Ties the Knot, it basically boils down to being a blackmail romance, and yet I knew that I loved this. I was like, yes, this is absolutely for me. Actually, a weird connection that both of these books do have is that they have a whole like waiting to consummate the relationship plot, and it's brought up by the characters repeatedly. In that, in When a Scot Ties the Knot, Maddie and Logan, the main characters, get married in a hand fasting ceremony, but they are not technically married until they have consummated the marriage. And that is something that ends up being put off for a while. Whereas in this book, we have Faye and Nazir, who for some reason haven't had sex yet, but being a way to say, oh, she's not really invested in him, that it's meant to be a clue that she isn't as attracted to him as she thought. Once again, just a funny little connection that you wouldn't expect these two books to have. I think the other reason that I ended up not feeling like I'd 100% enjoyed this book was due to the ending. One of the big markers between romance and literary fiction is that romance always has a happy ending. If a book says that it's a romance book and it doesn't have a happy ending, it's not a romance book. I'm sorry, we have to have our happily ever after. And whilst this book does technically have a happy ending in that the characters are happy for the most part, I, the reader, was left not very happy. I didn't really love the turn that this book went on. Like, the heart wants what the heart wants, but I did not want Aleem and Faye to get together. I wanted there to be a moment where she realised, no, this is not how it's meant to go. But like I say, the heart wants what the heart wants. Unfortunately, I can't make a final bookish connection to other Akwaeke Emezi books because I actually haven't read any other of their books. Though I'm definitely not dissuaded from reading them because, as I say, this was really well written, I thought. I thought it was crafted very well. It was really just the ending for me, and the second that I felt the book turning down that forbidden love of the father route, I thought, no, what are you doing? No. Everything that I've ever heard about Akwaeke Emezi points to them being a really great author, an author that I should check out, and I definitely love your recommendations. I'd be really interested to know if Akwaeke Emezi has said about their literary influences and inspirations, if there were any for this book. It's not something that I actually looked into before I did this video because I wanted this to be very much my personal experience with this book and what it made me think of. But yeah, those are all of the books that I thought about whilst I was reading You Made a Fool of Death with Your Beauty. As I say, I don't know if this is going to be a recurring recurring series because I don't know if this is going to happen for loads of the books that I read. But like I say, this is really just a reflection on individual reading experiences, on how your reading experiences can be very much dictated by what you've read in the past, and that is always going to be very personal. No one's reading history is going to be 100% the same, so what you get out of a book is never going to be 100% a replica of what somebody else thinks. And I'd really be interested to know about like weird literary parallels and connections that you've had whilst reading books, maybe ones that you wouldn't expect. If you were to want a proper comprehensive review, because I know that that's not what you got from this video, I would really recommend Scot from Gunpowder Fiction and Plot. He did a fantastic review of this book. Just generally, he is a much better reviewer than I am. I'd love to know if you've read this book, what you thought about it, and yeah, about any of these topics, I would love to hear from you. I hope you're having a fantastic day, and I look forward to talking to you again soon. Thanks. Bye.